Hi, I'm Peter Gelb, General Manager of the Met. Thank you for being here tonight. Welcome. This is our second Works in Process event at the Guggenheim this season. Earlier, we had presented The Exterminating Angel here before the premiere at the Met, which, as those of you who were here or saw it, remember, it's about guests who are trapped at a dinner party for which they can't escape, which was certainly seems like an ever increasingly appropriate metaphor for the trying times in which we live today. Today we're here to discuss Phelim McDermott's imaginative new production of Mozart's Così fan tutte, with a setting that has been transported forward in time from the 18th century Naples to 1950s Coney Island. Hopefully that time leap will satisfy those who thought that our new production of Tosca, set in Napoleonic Rome, was dangerously retro. As I've learned after 12 years as the Met's general manager, you can't win. However, I'm always heartened by what the playwright Eugene O'Neill said of his critics, which was, "God bless every bone in their heads." In today's presentation, we will learn the reasons why our new production is set in a 1950s carnival fairground, and why some of the non-singing performers include a strong man who can lift opera singers with his teeth, a snake charmer who performs with a live Burmese python, a fire eater, and a sword swallower. At the Met, we believe in the diversity of our casting. I'm joined this evening by the director and the conductor of our new Così, and we'll also be hearing from our terrific cast who will be performing, as well as talking to you. To my right is the director who, with Così, has created his third Met production, following his memorable vision for Philip Glass's Satyagraha and his dazzling Baroque pastiche, The Enchanted Islands, which featured Placido Domingo, amongst others. Placido played Neptune with a posse of airborne mermaids. Phelim is one of the founders of the UK-based improvisational theater company called Improbable. Please welcome Phelim McDermott.
Hello.
And next to Phelim is one of our leading maestros, who I should add, like many of the world's leading maestros, was flying. He only arrived yesterday from Sydney, so I know he's been drinking a lot of espresso backstage.
G'day.
The music director of the St. Louis Symphony, the chief conductor of the Sydney Symphony, and a conductor who has led numerous performances on the world's opera stages. At the Met, for example, he's conducted Janacek's Macropolis Case, Britain's Billy Budd, Nico Muhly, the premiere of Nico Muhly's Two Boys, and Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro. So he is certainly eclectic and wide-ranging in his tastes, and I'm very pleased to welcome David Robertson. So for those of you not familiar with the story, Così fan tutte is about two officers, Ferrando and Guglielmo, who, egged on by the manipulative Don Alfonso and his accomplice Despina, decide to test the fidelity of their fiancés, the sisters Dorabella and Fiordiligi. Ferrando and Guglielmo go to some extreme measures, changing their identities and attempting to seduce each other's lovers. It's a bittersweet comedy with some of Mozart's most memorable and lilting melodies, which serves as somewhat of an antidote to the sexist nature of the plot. So, Phelim, since this is your production, we should start with you. Maybe while we are showing a few images from this production originated at the English National Opera as a frequent co-producing partner of the Met. So while you perhaps could explain your approach to the production, we'll see some of the images up here.
Yeah, well, I guess the original idea for where we've set it it comes from the designer Tom Pye, who's done Così before, and he actually said, you know where I've always wanted to set Così, like in the Coney Island world, and I thought, that's a great idea. And one of the things that I had heard from people who've done the production before, which I hadn't, was that it's kind of a little bit unbelievable. These guys dress up as other people, put big moustaches on, and convince these women that they are not each other's, that they're not them, that they're two different guys. And how can that possibly be believable? And the idea that we might set it in this kind of like romantic world of Coney Island, the sideshow, the fairground, where the rules are not quite the same, where people get swept along by the kind of romance of the place, seemed to be a place where the audience could buy into that conceit, that the disguises would be bought by the audience, because it's not realistic. And the other thing about, as you're seeing for some of these pictures, the other thing about that world is it's very beautiful, it's romantic, but then if you actually look around the back, if you scratch the surface off of the pictures, or you turn the lights off, it's actually slightly seedy and grubby. So it seemed like a really good kind of container for this story, which has this kind of this beautiful romantic music sometimes, but then actually this quite, in some levels, dark story within it, where these lovers are manipulating each other in this quite, as you say, it's sometimes considered a sexist sort of story. That world could contain that well. And then for Don Alfonso, we kind of see him as the guy who is the wheeler dealer who looks after all the sideshow acts down at Coney Island. So when they go into the garden, they're actually going into the pleasure garden of the fairground, and he, on some levels, he's a bit more like Oberon is with the fairies. He has a chorus of Coney Island. They're kind of like spirits in a way, who not just help with the deception and the disguise and the story, but they also help on stage with the scene changes and creating the world. And people who've maybe seen some of other shows that I've done, very often we'll have an ensemble of performers who are very human element to making scene changes happen. So rather than having kind of big Broadway machinery making the illusions and the things happen, we have our skills team, who are really, a lot of them are actually from Coney Island. They are people who perform in the sideshows down there. So we came and auditioned them. And
you auditioned them last spring, right?
We did, yes. And we'd done it in England with performers there. And of course, we would say, oh, it's set in a kind of Coney Island world. And they were like, oh, that's it. But then coming here to New York, where Coney Island actually is, and being able to bring some of those performers was just a really exciting thing to do, bringing these worlds together. The Metropolitan Opera meets Coney Island seems a good thing.
We've been waiting for a long time.
A long time. It's a long time coming, as they say.
I know you mentioned to the cast in a rehearsal the other day that you were planning a field trip to bring them all out to Coney Island.
I think we should. I mean, they've already seen some of the things that the skills team can do, some of the sword swallowing and some of the acts. They're pretty extraordinary performers. And we've been making sure it really is a whole ensemble working together. It's been an exciting first week.
But the snake has not appeared.
The snake's not here yet. In fact, we're still holding auditions.
For the snake?
Yeah. Don't worry, not here. It's not.
The coloratura is particularly difficult for the snake.
Exactly, yeah.
So David, I'm sure you have encountered numerous productions of Così in your career, and obviously you've seen many as well as conducted some. What's your take so far on this new approach?
You know, the thing that's interesting about this approach is that the central problem is this one for an audience of the believability of the two ladies suddenly seeing these two men who appear to them as strangers, and them slowly falling in love with these two men. And that's usually the crux, and it's difficult to bring it off. And what happens is that then that actually sort of slants the drama towards, oh, aren't these women silly? And as the title of the production, which comes from Don Basilio's line in Figaro, when he discovers Cherubino in With Susanna and the Countess, and he says, Così fan tutte le belle, and this Così fan tutte is the name that Mozart wanted to give to the opera, whereas De Ponte wanted the school for lovers. And in a sense, they both work. But what is interesting is that the men, right at the start, look at their women purely as objects of their own ego. And this often gets overlooked. So these are people who, I mean, these are the original trophy wives. They're not yet married, but they are willing to sort of put them on the gaming table with Don Alfonso and say, sure, here's the collateral, these two ladies, you know, and if we lose, you get 1,000 zecchini, but if not, you know, you give us the money. And this already shows a complete lack of understanding from the men of who these women actually are. So before the women fall for someone who is supposed to resemble the person that they're in love with, we have to be aware that the men are actually not really aware of who the people are that they profess to love so deeply. And so over the course of the drama, what we see is this incredible mutability of the human emotional core. And that's one of the things that Mozart's music does so well, because he allows us to inhabit each one of these emotions absolutely fully. And the reason it becomes a great piece of theater is that then the actual reality that we as an audience are looking at on stage has this disconnect, exactly as Phelim was saying. When you scratch a little beneath the surface and you look behind the things that the sort of real emotions that this music is generating, both in the people who are singing it as well as in those of us who are listening to it, you suddenly wonder, well, wait a minute, what is the emotion that's actually causing this to happen? So I love, for example, that when Ferrando is really upset that his beloved has been unfaithful to him, and yet at the same time he's singing, you know, I still love her. And I think that in a production like this one, we can actually get to the point where, you know, we're going to check a couple of times, wait a minute, which one is the one that he says he still loves? Because in fact, that's the point that I think Mozart and De Ponte wanted to get across, is that everyone here is learning about how love is not this one sort of thing that once you set it up, it's then done forever. So what's fun for me in this production is figuring out ways to actually use the music to, in a sense, heighten this atmosphere of seduction, but also of this sense of magic, which is clearly in the music and is very definitely part of the whole nighttime scene in a place like Coney Island.
In terms of his compositional technique, and this opera followed Don Giovanni and Figaro.
Right.
So, and how would you place it in terms of the hierarchy of Mozart's works?
Oh, that's like saying, you know, the hierarchy of the children. You know, that's and my second son always says, yes, but I know I'm the one you love the most. But I think that the thing is that he's really, at the time that he wrote it, he and De Ponte were absolutely pushing the envelope. This was the time of the Enlightenment, and this is the last one of the operas before heads start rolling in France. And Joseph II then dies, and his brother who ascends to the throne, Leopold II, is not at all as interested in the same sorts of things. And you see Mozart actually starting to move into church music, because this was one of the things that the new emperor was really involved in. But I think that if you look at especially the operas from Vienna, so Entführung, and then through Figaro, and then through Don Giovanni, there are all of these ideas about how complex human beings are. And the thing that makes Mozart's character so real to us, it seems, to me in any case, is that they're all flawed. And so this was around the same time that Immanuel Kant wrote the wonderful lines used by Isaiah Berlin in one of his essays, where he says, aus so krummem Holz, woraus der Mensch gemacht ist, kann nichts Gerades gezimmert werden, which roughly translates as, from such crooked timber as which mankind is made, can nothing straight be fashioned. And it is, in fact, this sense that all of these people are people that need love and that need to be recognized as human beings with all of their positive qualities and all of their flaws. And I think more than any of the other operas up until then, and then to some extent this has continued in the Magic Flute, there is this sense that we admire and are at the same time somewhat taken aback by every single one of the main characters. And I think that particularly in a production like this, which has a group of very skilled people, but who do not necessarily act the same way as the normal people who stand on stage, open their mouth and sing. How normal is that? That what we get is this larger picture of humanity, and in a sense, an understanding that we need to embrace that humanity with a great deal of humility.
I think there's something in that of, I think that was kind of why we were drawn, maybe intuitively drawn to that kind of Coney Island world, because on lots of levels, that is a world that embraces the marginalized. It embraces, and on some level, I think the opera is about, thinking about what you were saying earlier, it's about people coming to terms with aspects of themselves that they have marginalized.
Yeah.
You go, you fall in love with someone and that's how it is. It stays like that.
Yep.
Whereas actually, in the process of this journey, they find out, each one of them discovers these aspects of themselves and are put up in touch with these aspects of themselves, which they didn't even know were part of love or part of themselves.
Yeah.
So the idea that this all happens in this Coney Island world seems to be a good thing to hold that. I think the other thing to say is this idea, I didn't actually say when they get disguised in the original, I think they come back disguised as Albanian soldiers, is that right?
Albanian noblemen.
And Albanian noblemen.
Yeah.
Well, in our production, they get dressed up as like carny workers, the kind of guys who would stand on the back of the I think you call them bumper cars. You know,
Yeah.
That the girls kind of go, oh, sexy guys, you know, the kind of rough, slightly scary guys at the fairground. That seems to be again another of the aspect of the marginalized sexuality that's there, that's brought in. If you can make a world which is authentic to those stories, it doesn't have to be like realistic, then you can hit a truth, I think. And as long as that whole world in some way fits together in an authentic way, then you can make it truthful, I think. Truthful sometimes gets confused with being realistic or naturalistic. But, you know, we're doing opera. There are people singing. It doesn't have to be realistic. It just has to be believably authentic.
So, speaking of singing, we should mention our wonderful cast. All of the principals are here tonight and will be singing for you. I should mention who the cast includes. It's playing Fiordiligi is Amanda Majeski, who's one of our leading young sopranos. Playing Dorabella is Serena Malfi, who most recently was singing Cherubino in Marriage of Figaro. Kelli O'Hara, who more often is starring in Broadway musicals, is playing the role of Despina. Ben Bliss, the tenor, who has sung in a number of roles now at the Met, and most recently as Tamino in the Magic Flute, is singing Ferrando. Adam Plachetka is Guglielmo, and Christopher Maltman is Don Alfonso. And I guess, you know, in listening to what you were saying, David, and about the flawed characters who have redeeming characteristics, I guess Don Alfonso and Despina have to be sort of in a category of their own, don't they?
Well, this is the thing. You could look at it and say, well, these are stock characters. but I don't think that they are. I think both De Ponte and Mozart work very carefully to give a sense. We were talking with Kelli today. She was doing this marvelous thing in her aria from the beginning where she says, are you expecting from men and soldiers some sort of constancy? Really? What girl, what are you thinking? When she's talking to the ladies. And there's this marvelous moment that happens nowhere else in the opera where all of a sudden Mozart gives us the minor ninth chord, of which is the most expressive chord at his disposal for pain and suffering. And it's right on the place in which she says, how could you ask these barbarians pity? Ask pity of them. And then she says, ask pity. And we get a moment, a window into Despina's soul to realize just the mountain of hurt that is there, that she keeps guarded. And then Mozart actually gives her 3 whole dotted quarter notes of eighth notes to kind of calm down and get back into character and say, this is all fine and it'll be good. I'll show you how everything works.
Well, we're going to be hearing Kelli singing that Despina aria in a few moments. But first we're going to hear the Act 1 trio, Suave sia il vento, with Don Alfonso and the sisters Fiordiligi and Dorabella, who are saying farewell to their respective fiancés.
Yes, they've just said farewell.
They've been tricked into thinking that they're going off to war before they come back.
Good winds, and so may all of the breezes carry their vessels safely to its harbor.
So, Phelim, in your staging, how are you, before we hear this trio song?
Well, we're down at the seafront, so it's kind of looking out to sea and seeing them, sort of again the romance of being by the sea. We've not quite got to the fairground yet. We're on the seafront.
All right, great. So please now welcome soprano Amanda Majeski, who sings Fiordiligi, mezzo-soprano Serena Malfi, our Dorabella, and baritone Christopher Maltman, who plays Don Alfonso. And they'll be accompanied on piano by Met assistant conductor Natalia Katyukova. Please welcome them. bravo, Christopher, and bravo. So, thank you so much. I know you've all had a very, very long day of rehearsals today. You had a staging rehearsal, musical rehearsals, so thank you very much for being here this evening.
It's a pleasure.
So you've sung so many different roles on the stage of the Met and other opera houses, everything from Verdi, leading Verdi roles to Mozart, leading Mozart roles. What is your take on this character of Don Alfonso?
Well, I have a long history with this opera, and I've sung Guglielmo many, many, many times as
Right.
well, and Don Alfonso not so much, but obviously, whereas both Phelim and David's role is to have a broad view of the piece, to really find out the extent of the entire thing. I always try and devote myself to the point of view of the character that I'm playing, and so I have to have a very role-centric view of this piece. And on the face of it, of course, there is almost an altruistic side to Don Alfonso, that somehow he's there to educate these people and to lift the scales from their eyes and show them that, you know, although love may not be exactly what they thought it was, there is actually a sort of happy place at the end. But as has already been discussed, there's a much deeper, more human side to him, and I feel that he himself carries a very large wound as far as love is concerned, and that a lot of his motivation is almost to shatter the innocence of everybody around him, so that everybody then inhabits the same world that Don Alfonso sees. And so, in a sense, it's like an itch he has to scratch. He can't leave this perfection alone, this innocence alone. He needs to separate them from this veneer of love as he sees it, and show them how interactions between men and women really happen.
So you're imagining his backstory when you approach the role.
Absolutely. And of course there's another interesting side to it, which is what exactly is Don Alfonso's relationship to Despina. And in our production so far, I don't want to give too much away, but we have been exploring that perhaps Despina is the reason for his hurt, and he orbits her, and he can't quite ever drag himself away from her influence.
And so how long ago did you sing Guglielmo in this?
I think my last Guglielmo was about 4 or 5 years ago. I mean, I'm only 21, so, you know. Yeah, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, but I mean, I sang my first Guglielmo probably when I was about 26 or 27. So, I mean, I have now a 22-year history with this particular opera. And it's sort of endless. I remember Jonathan Miller saying that it was one of the only operas of Don Giovanni, I forgot to say, I'm so Don Giovanni fixated at the moment, but one of the only operas of Mozart that could be completely convincingly taken out of its time, because it simply is a drama between 6 people, and it could happen in a white box, which is in fact what Jonathan Miller did. He said it in a white box. And I think he's absolutely right. This is timeless. The interactions that go on between these people are about timeless human problems and timeless human feelings. And in another 1,000 years, it'll be just as relevant as it is now.
You know, I know one of the, I think, challenges for opera singers and for directors and conductors too, I'm sure, is, you know, in the operatic canon, you have these core pieces like Così, which you've performed numerous times in both of these roles. And how do you deal with that? And I'm interested to hear what Phelim has to say about that as well, in terms of how do you deal with coming together in a new production And are you able to wipe the slate clean in your mind as you walk into a rehearsal room?
I think that's absolutely my job. It's absolutely my job to return to the piece, to return to the libretto, to return to what's said, as though it's the first time I've ever done it. And of course, the amazing thing about opera, which absolutely cannot remain a museum piece, we can't do it always in 18th century costumes and just, you know, marvel at how pretty it is. These are incredible human stories, and as the lens of time moves on, we view and we see different things in these operas. We see different things from how Mozart's contemporaries would have viewed this piece. And one of the most amazing things about this one is, of course, it's on the surface, it seems incredibly sexist, Così fan tutte. But the people who come out the worst in this are the men. The men are absolute horrors. Yeah. It's an examination of despicable male behavior. Yeah.
But do you think that that's the way Mozart viewed it back in the day, or is that just the way we're looking at it today?
Not quite so much, but certainly in this day and age, the way that they behave, the way that the men behave, and as David rightly said, as they treat these women like sort of movable property. You know, they're just bits and pieces that can be toyed around with. And of course, if you place any human being in extremis, if you place them in an untenable situation, they will behave, you know, in a way that's commensurate with the pressure that's placed on them. And so it's a hideous examination of the men, and I don't think really the women do too badly.
So you were saying though that you try to go to wipe the slate clean when you enter into a new production. I know, Phelim, you have an interesting approach in terms of at least the early rehearsal period, which addresses that. Which can you describe your rehearsal technique?
I mean, it's kind of interesting because for me this is already like it's a remount. So I've done it with other performers already. So on one level,
when you did it in London.
When we did it in London, yes. So on one level, whenever I make a piece, I ideally aim to go, it's the people in this room that we're making this piece with. Yeah. And they will discover things that I haven't even begun to find. I think
meaning the performers.
Meaning the performers that I'm working with today. And so you have to kind of like, every time you perform it on a certain level, the performers need to wipe the slate clean. Of course, they know what they're going to do, but they have to freshly mint those moments each time if the audience are going to buy into them, and it's a live thing, which opera is. One of the ways that I've been working is I use a technique called the Whelan recording technique, and it's actually for acting. For actors working without scripts in their hands. And I've for a while now used it with opera singers. So basically you record the music to begin with kind of neutrally, and then you play the music back.
When you say the music, the performances of the singers in the room?
Yeah, so they sit down with their scores and they record it, and then we play it back, but they get into the space and they're free to move whilst it's playing, and they hear their voices and they're free to follow their impulses. Basically, it means they have to start acting straight away without going, now what should we do in this bit? What should we do in that? We'll sing, and I've got no. You're almost at performance level from day one, which on some levels is a kind of bit of a shock as a process. But what it means is sometimes you see the performers shedding previous versions of how they did certain bits as it goes on, because you can't hold on to how it happened last time, because you're in the moment with someone else who's behaving totally differently. So the way that I work, I would say, is a way based on the performers and getting the performers to really interact and to be a strong ensemble in the space. If you can do that, they will reinvent this music and these words in ways that we've never seen before. Even they will find things that they surprise themselves with. which for me is when performers are most exciting, when you see them discovering even that aria they've sung, however many times they've sung it, they discover something new in it, a new emotion. And so we've been working, kind of digging away at that.
I have to say, I can back that up, practically speaking, because when you're asked to improvise in that way, the first instinct, of course, is the 2004 Covent Garden production. Oh, yes, okay, let's do that. Okay, so we do that shtick. And then you sort of shed these performances you've done before, like snakeskins. And you sort of wriggle out of one, and then Phelim says, no, do it differently. Just whatever you did last time, don't do it. So you work through your backlog of performances until you don't have any more left. And then you think, hang on, what actually was I saying? So how will I move? How will I do this? And you sort of reinvent it. It works fantastically well.
Well, someone who definitely does not have to reinvent her performance since she's never sung it before is Kelli O'Hara, who's going to, of course, many of you know her. She's a very unusual artist in that she is pursuing a dual career, singing, obviously as a star in Broadway musicals, but now this will be her second appearance at the Metropolitan Opera. She made her debut as Valenciennes in The Merry Widow a few years ago, and we have other plans for her in the future as well. So I don't know of any, I was checking with our Met archivist today, and other than Renee Fleming, who was doing the same, but approaching it from the operatic perspective, and now coming up, it will be singing in Carousel, Kelli seems to be the only opera star of recent decades to actually be doing this dual feat. So we're very happy that she is here with us today, and she'll be singing Despina's aria in Uomini Insodati. Sorry. You want to just tell us, David or Phelim, what this...
Yes, because the two sisters are absolutely distraught that their men have been called off to battle all of a sudden and have to go, and they barely had a chance to say goodbye. And Despina comes in and says, oh my goodness, what's wrong with you ladies? And they both express the wish to expire on the spot because they have such a horrible thing, but they know that their lovers will be constant to them. And Despina looks at them slightly askance and says, wait a minute, you're telling me that you're expecting to have real faithfulness from men and from soldiers? Let me give you the lowdown on this, and that's essentially what the aria does.
Great. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kelli O'Hara, accompanied by Natalia Katyukova.
In uomini sperare felicia.
So that was, I guess, the first time you sung Mozart in front of a live audience.
First time in my life. Besides my Met audition in 1998. Thank you.
So Kelli, we're thrilled, obviously, that you've joined the cast for Così, and maybe you could talk a little bit about your character, who you're playing, and also I'd love to talk a little bit about this unusual relationship you now have between opera and the world of Broadway. But start with Despina.
Okay, Despina. What an unusual character for me to get to play, actually. I tend to play the wholesome ones, the ones who believe in love first and foremost, and I love playing those women. I believe in love myself. But Despina has been hurt. She sings an aria in the second act where she says, basically, by the age of 15, a woman needs to know how to cry, fake laugh, has to know how to deal with a man in a certain way, how to play with him so that she can just basically stay afloat. She's hurt. She's bitter. Maybe this guy hurt her. We're figuring that all out. I like that she has pain. That's to say that. I mean, I like that there's something to make change with. She does care about the women that she cares for, Fiordiligi and Dorabella, but I think she also, misery loves company, and she wants to pull them down a notch because, she has been hurt, especially by men. So I like playing this because there's richness in that, and there's anger and there's pain, and we're in a time right now. We're going through something where there is a voice that people want to have, women want to have right now, and it's flawed. David, we talked about this today. Mozart has written these very flawed characters, but and so she's not right in her behavior always, but she is speaking up a little bit through this little game that he's invited her to play. So I think it's fun. And very quickly, thanks to you, yes, I have been invited to sing on the Met stage, and that is a dream that I never thought would come true, and I am just very, very grateful and working as hard as I possibly can to earn that privilege every day.
When you were brought up in Oklahoma,
Yeah.
You actually studied to be an opera singer at first.
Yes. I did get a degree in opera. For many reasons, after my undergraduate degree, I packed it up and moved to New York and went to acting school and changed my whole path, which I don't regret. Some people go to the Met and go this way. I kind of went this way and jumped over, I guess. But I missed it. I always missed it. On Broadway, I'm the girl who's too legit. And at the Met, I'm not quite legit. I always had it in the back of my head. And so the opportunity, believe me, is the grandness of it is not lost on me. It's very special.
Besides having to sing in Italian, which you don't do on Broadway, I guess, how would you describe the differences in terms of your singing, the technique you need to employ, and just the whole approach to being a Broadway musical star and singing opera?
On Broadway, we have mics.
Right.
We're mic'd, and that's because we do 8 shows a week, to be honest. I pride myself in thinking that I don't change that much, and I always tend to do roles that are more classically bent, rounder singing. But I do know, now that I've sung there once, the difference is the absolute physicality of it in that space, your body, the sound you make. It is tenfold. We do rely on those mics somewhat to get us through 8 shows, even though the heart is full and we're giving 110% of ourselves. That voice quality, I'm not going to say the support is that much different, but it's a larger than life feeling. It's grander and greater than I've ever felt. So there is a difference, and you're exhausted, and therefore you can only do the 2. It's different than an 8-show a week thing. I wouldn't dare want to try that. 8 shows.
Of course, Broadway, I guess up until the 50s, didn't have amplification either.
No, I don't guess they did. And you look at some of those old orchestrations, which we've used in some of the revivals I've done, and you see where they come down to allow for certain voice types, and but they didn't, and I'm not sure. We've probably gotten lazy, Peter. You're right. We've probably gotten lazy.
I wasn't accusing you of that.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No, I do. They didn't use mics, and I'm not sure what the different things are designed differently. People don't lean in to listen like they used to.
Right.
People are used to having things. I'm proud that I'm in musicals where we do lower the mics. That's always done in the musicals I'm in. They're more naturally designed. But you go to those musicals where it's just thrown, the sound is so loud and it's thrown in your face, and that's not really my type of musical. So I'm more of the school of less amplification.
And also, some of the musicals you've sung in have had much larger orchestras than typical Broadway shows, like the South Pacific Orchestration, which was...
Yeah, the Lincoln Center productions, we had 40 pieces in South Pacific, and you know, that's a very special and unusual occurrence now. So this is magical, the Met.
There's just going to say that this, for me, as a relatively newcomer to opera, so I think it's 11 years ago, did my first opera. This was my big discovery about opera. I did do some work on musicals. And there's something extraordinary about opera as the world gets more amplified, technologized. There is this form that still exists that is incredibly powerful, but at the same time is incredibly vulnerable, because it totally depends on the sound, the acoustic sound, the human voice of acoustic instruments. And it feels like, for me, this thing that, wow, this is where we're holding something very, very important for the world of the arts, because it's almost not even noticed that's what it is. People think, oh, opera is that thing where everyone's kind of blasting, but actually, at the heart of it is this incredibly vulnerable, beautiful thing, which is the human voice, the human instrument. And that can hold the atmosphere of a space like the Met is just a phenomenal thing. We need to look after it.
Well said. We have two more musical selections, so we should not hesitate in introducing them. The next one is going to be the beautiful second act duet between Guglielmo, who is in the opera at this point in disguise, in the second act, and Dorabella, and it's a seduction duet.
Yes.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
They're trying to exchange gifts. If Guglielmo gets a token from Dorabella that he can show Ferrando, and
then he succeeded.
Then he has succeeded. And she says, no, I'm not going to give you that. But what's wonderful is that Dorabella has actually really taken to heart a lot of Despina's advice about how you need to be able to lie and be coquettish and feign great emotional pain in order to get what it is that you want. So there are so many different levels here. And I think what's fabulous and is often forgotten is Mozart, I think, was drawn to this story and understood it in a way differently than almost anyone else, because he first fell in love with Aloysia Weber, and then 6 years later married her sister, Constanza.
Aha.
And so he actually has a real life, what is this sort of thing like? And I think more than in any other, this is the aria in which you see them both enjoying the coquettishness of it. And I think Guglielmo has forgotten that he's actually in a race to do something. He actually is being seduced by her without realizing it.
Great. Well, here now is Serena Malfi and Adam Plachetka, joined by Natalia Katyukova. we have one more final performance for this evening, which is the other half of our quartet of young lovers singing their second act duet. David, you want to give us an
yes,
intro to
this
that?
is. I believe this is where they've finally overcome. These are the two ones who, in a sense, are the most idealistic, and they've finally overcome their idealism and realized that the other one is their highest ideal, and this is a complete surprise to both of them. And so all of a sudden they reunite in this most glorious music.
So please welcome Amanda Majeski as Fiordiligi and tenor Ben Bliss as Ferrando, again accompanied by pianist Natalia Katyukova.
Sconosciuto
I think I mentioned earlier, but all four of our young singers are accomplished Mozart singers who have all sung on the stage of the Met in numerous roles. Amanda, I mentioned that Ben had recently sung Tamino, but Amanda has also sung the Contessa in Figaro at the Met, and so they're wonderful, wonderful artists. So our production of Così, it may sound like we're ready, but there are 4 weeks of rehearsals to go. The show, the new production opens on March 15th. We're all very excited about it. Is there any, maybe before we leave, Phelim, you and David perhaps could just mention what you will be both striving for, working on in these coming weeks of final rehearsals.
I mean, bringing it, that's the exciting thing about opera. There are so many different elements. There's the set, there's the singing, the day when I get to hear the orchestra for the first time is incredibly exciting. So creating a space when all those things can be in good conversation with each other is what we're aiming for.
You know, I mean, one of the things that's nice is the way my memory works. When I will open up Così fan tutte again, I will read the notes, and I will not be able to read those notes without hearing Christopher Maltman and Kelli O'Hara and all of the singers who are in this production, because for me it's almost like jazz in a sense that there are certain things that are absolutely down. You have the blues form, and you've got the number of bars, and you have this is the improvisation here, and this is the chord progression, but everything is about finding out what these incredible artists can actually do with this material, and that is something that is just awe-inspiring, not only for me, but for everybody involved in the production and the audience.
Chris, Kelly, any final thoughts?
Just hugely excited. Phelim has created an incredible atmosphere in the rehearsal room, one that is more inclusive, one that is more empowering than I think any other experience I've ever had in opera. And I think with the amount of talent we have in the room, the ingredients are there for a really fizzing final product.
I couldn't say it any better. Thank you, Chris.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you've only heard the tip of the iceberg tonight, so please come to the Met. And thank you so much for being here tonight.